Hi, and welcome to another episode of pianoTV. So today we are going to talk about sight reading, which is a topic near and dear to my heart because I'm not very good at it. Some people are naturals at sight reading. They just adapt to it very quickly, and with very little struggle, they seem to improve. But for others like myself, a little bit more work in specific areas is needed to get to a point where you can actually look at a piece of music and feel pretty good about reading through it, if not perfectly, because I mean that's a whole other level. So in today's video, we're going to talk about some strategies that I've used and I found really effective for myself and for my students to become a better sight reader. So let's dive right in. Sometimes quantity will in fact lead to quality. So as a kid growing up, I was a pretty bad sight reader, but then I never practiced doing it. So that was my biggest problem. What would happen when I would be assigned a new piece is I would just memorize it really quickly so I didn't have to rely on anything written on the page. So as an adult, I've been working on correcting that. And what I try to do, I'm not always good about this, but I do try to sight read for 5 to 10 minutes a day. Think about it as like Sudoku for your brain, but instead you're developing a valuable skill by learning the piano, and it's just as good for your brain. Along those same lines, you can try printing out just a random page of sheet music and writing down all the letters on the page to give yourself kind of like a little assignment away from the keyboard. I don't recommend doing this with pieces you're learning, because then you'll put the page up at the piano and you'll look at your letters instead of looking at the actual notes, so that's not helping you sight read. But if you're just away from the piano as extra practice, writing down the letter names can be really useful. Interval recognition. So for those of you who don't know what intervals are, they are the distance between notes, okay? So an A to a B would be a second, an A to a C would be a third, and so on. Knowing intervals is might even be more important than knowing the letter names. So this is another thing where I would suggest just print off random sheet music and write in all the interval distances until you get really good at recognizing the gap between notes. So here I have just like a random song excerpt. Now, a good sight reader will take a minute to look at the key signature and the time signature. I kind of cut this out of like half a song, but the time signature in this one is 3/4. It notes that at the beginning of the song, but it doesn't note it in the middle. So you're looking at your key signature, you're looking at your starting notes, and you want to get a scope of from start to finish, where is your hand is going to be. So my first note here is a D, and I notice that the lowest note that I'm going to play over here is a B flat, and the highest note I'm going to play over here, at least from the first line, is an F. So just to check out a good finger position to start in, you can start with finger 3, and that'll allow your hand to just use all 5 of your fingers without doing any weird crossing overs for this line at least anyway. So I always watch out for patterns like that. And it's good to note where the intervals are. So here we have a harmonic interval, 2 at the same time. And I know automatically that's a third, that's a sixth. And then that top note carries forward, and then we've got a third again. And it steps down a third, and so on and so on. So being able to kind of see those things at a glance is really important. It's more important to look at the interval patterns almost than reading the individual letters. If printing off worksheets isn't your thing, or you're an overachiever, another thing you can do is download note reading apps or interval recognition apps, both of which are really important, as previously mentioned. And it's the kind of thing that you can do while you're in line somewhere or waiting for a bus or wherever you happen to have random little 5-minute pockets of time. It's a good idea to use little memory tricks for a while until you just kind of automatically know where the notes are. So I did a previous video on this, tips and tricks for how to read notes on the staff and just remember them better. So click on the screen and that'll take you to that if you forget them. But basically the idea of it is to have a few landmark notes that you just automatically know and you don't have to think about. And then the idea is, if you have landmark notes, it'll help you start filling in the gaps to memorizing all of the notes. Because eventually the goal is to be able to just kind of like look at an A and be like, I know you're an A. You don't even have to think about that, or any other letter. Not that A's are special. I like A's, but B's are good too. I see this with students a lot, so trying to read every single note at a time instead of looking to the larger scope of the phrase. So they'll fixate on just this one note at a time. So that's a C, that's a C, that's a G, that's a G, which gets to be pretty complicated the more notes you pile on top of that. So if you have notes in the bass clef and maybe some doubled up notes in the treble clef, it ends up being a very slow way to read through the notes. That would be like trying to read a book by reading each individual letter instead of looking at the word. So when you're reading, you see the word horse, not HORSE, and it's the same thing with music. So you want to look to the phrases and just imagine that this phrase is kind of like a word. I know that's like a little bit of a rough metaphor, but it'll work. So instead of just pinpointing all the letters, you want to look at the overall shape. So where does your hand need to go? Well, this is your lowest note, so it's pretty obvious that you should start with your thumb when you're over there. So what about the leaps? How big are the leaps? Well, here we can see that there's a fifth right off the bat. And then we can see here that you're going to be stepping even higher up here. So instead of jumping from finger 1 to 5 right away, which is going to end up being awkward when we move even higher, you can kind of see immediately that you want to use finger 1 and 4, and then your pinky is still available for that next note. And this is the kind of thing that you just want to be able to look at a phrase and recognize the overall shape. So it's kind of like you don't want to just stare at the individual trees, but you want to see like the forest as a whole, for another crude example. Lots of sight reading problems can be boiled down to a problem with reading rhythm. So it's one thing to be able to look at a note and know that it's an A or a B or a C. And it's another thing to be able to look at a note and see the interval distance between them. But if you're unable to quickly grasp rhythms when you look at them, that can seriously slow you down too. So the best approach for this, I find, is an interactive approach where maybe just print off or like load up on your iPad or whatever, simple rhythms, 1 or 2 bars long, all different types and varieties, all flavors of rhythms, and just practice counting them while also clapping them, because I feel like it just like triggers something in the brain more so than if you're just thinking about it. I don't know. I always make people clap in my class. Maybe that's just me. But if you have a half note and 2 quarter notes, 1, 2, 3, 4, really practice that until you can just kind of look at it and know what the rhythm is supposed to sound like. Even though being able to sight read and having a well-trained ear seem like 2 really different things, and when people talk about that, they're usually like, oh, I'm really good at sight reading, or oh, I have a really good ear for music, but it's usually not both together. But they actually do work really well together. So for example, my ear is pretty good, and I'm very good at hearing interval distances. So for example, without looking at the piano, I can tell a 4th or a 5th apart, or like a 3rd or a 2nd apart, or any of those random examples here. So if I'm looking at a page of music and I see a 6th, but my fingers accidentally mess up and they don't stretch far enough and I play a 5th instead, I can instantly hear that it's wrong just because my ears are really well trained for those intervals. So by training your ear to hear intervals and distances, it's a great way to kind of self-correct as you're reading music, and it helps sight reading become more seamless. So there's lots of apps and internet sites and stuff you can use to also train your ear in this regard. There's also a tactile aspect to sight reading as well. So say you notice that there's a 5th in your music. Since you've been practicing reading intervals, you don't have to think about it. You can just look at your music and instantly know it's 5th, right? But do your fingers know what a 5th feels like? Can you naturally feel the distance without looking at your hands? You should be able to close your eyes and feel out any type of interval without really knowing where you are. I'm again, you can't see my face, but I'm closing my eyes. I can instantly know this is a 2nd. That's about the span of a 6th. That's a 3rd. Even feel out octaves. I don't think it's worthwhile to go any farther than an octave because some people's hands aren't even that big. But if you can, with your eyes closed, get like a tactile sensation of note distances, it's going to go a long way to really help you. And I also think practicing with your eyes closed is kind of fun, but maybe that's just me. So hopefully with this video, you've begun to see that becoming a better sight reader is all about taking a holistic approach. So it's not just about memorizing notes or just about memorizing intervals, but you need to get your brain involved in your tactile senses and all different kinds of parts of your brain and learning centers. I don't know what like the fancy psychological terms are, but you dig what I'm saying. Anyway, good luck with this. It's a really important skill to develop. It's a big part of being a piano player and a musician. So hopefully it goes well for you, and I will catch you next time. There was a bird right outside my window.